Let me tell you the story about my pathetic triceps and how I fixed them. Like, I can't emphasize enough how small my arms were. Where there should have been a horseshoe, there was a shoestring. It was not a good look. Now, I had a contest coming up called World's Strongest Logger. It was sponsored by a logging company and as such had some amazing equipment. They had the prettiest real wood log I had ever seen. I mean, Slater would be so fucking lucky, and it was going to be for a max log press. So let me get this straight. I get free room and food as part of a vacation away from the liberal rotted swamp of Southern California, where I would be pressing on custom made equipment in front of an actual crowd against a backdrop of redwoods and magical forest creatures, judged by the legends of strength, competing directly against heavyweight strongman pros in an open division where instead of cutting, I could spend my prep achieving a Kyriakos level of skin stretching bloat by mainlining salt and corn syrup. Say fucking less. I was going for that max log press and I was going to win. Now, I focused on the log press over the other events because when you're born with the pipes of a Whitney Houston or a Mariah Carey, you don't take up the fucking pan flute. You double down on the gifts God gave you, and God gave me a -4 ape index. Those long arm freaks were gonna run roughshod over me over all the other events, but damn it, I was gonna make my stand on the log press. Let's go. So I started overhead pressing my face off, and as the weeks went on, my numbers ticked up, my shoulders swell, but a stick point persisted every time I would try to break past my old numbers, and that was unsurprising because my triceps still looked like so much string cheese. So as I sadly looked at the depressing void on the back of my arm where actual tricep meat should have been, I knew that I wasn't gonna get shit done unless I fixed it. Now, the first problem I had to contend with, the reason that I let my triceps get into this sad state of affairs to begin with, is because my elbows would always fucking kill me whenever I tried to do any tricep isolation movement. I could press until the cows came home. I could do overloaded, band-assisted max lockout work with 150% over my max, and my elbows were fine. But as soon as I tried to do any single arm cable, 5-pound, slow eccentric, pencil neck fuckery, my elbow felt like it got replaced with a joint made out of sandpaper. So I did some digging and I talked to some of my arm wrestling friends. Now, the wisdom I came across is that tendons suck at healing and growing because they don't get blood flow unless they're actually moving. Those surfaces have to be sliding, and they're often not. So when you're doing nothing, you're not doing a lot to grow that connective tissue. It's actually better to get a bone break than a really bad tendon sprain or rupture because tendons don't have that blood flow. It takes so long for them to recover, so you have to be proactive. So these guys who would spend the day getting so drunk they couldn't feel feelings and then arm wrestling well past the point where that inflammation would have set in will immediately go to the gym, grab a band, and do work to drive blood into those joints and help with recovery, and it worked. Now, this coincided with a West Side staple for tricep growth, which was 100 rep band press downs, which goes against like every bit of dogma for hypertrophy and gains that you can conceive of. It was well outside of the often touted 5 to 30 rep range. It's like the magic range for muscle growth where people think you're not going to gain an ounce of muscle if you go outside of that. And banded press downs are also biased away from the lengthened position. It's heaviest when the muscle is contracted. There's almost no resistance when the muscle is lengthened. So this should be a really shitty way of adding mass. Yet a lot of these guys were using this as a staple to help get blood into the muscle, get some growth, and help with their bench press numbers. So I said, what the fuck? I got nothing else going on. I can't do anything except press. I'm sitting here with my dick in my hand. These other guys are handling immense amounts of weight and posting it on social media, and I feel like a useless piece of shit, so I might as well go do some high rep band press downs and just see. Well, the effect, dear viewer, is that my triceps actually started to grow and they felt amazing. The blood flow made it feel like I was doing my pressing work and my tricep work on a cloud, and as the weeks went by, the pain started to dissipate. I could do it daily. I could do it multiple times per day, and my arms would swell up after a couple of sets like I had an abscess that had to be drained. And it also felt akin to something like activation, for as controversial as that term is. It felt like my mummified triceps had been woken up. Like I could bounce them after a set the way a bodybuilder would bounce his pecs while flirting with the judges. Instead of the vague push that you would execute when the weight got heavy, I now felt my triceps with purchase. They would actually cue my elbows to floss in, so I was doing a more efficient lockout. I actually felt them contribute to the press at key stages of the press, and that was absolutely massive. Now, I would go one step further and dabble in occlusion training. Any of you that have heard of it might have come across some interesting things that have been written. Basically, it's a way to shortcut the path to metabolic fatigue. Instead of having to do a billion reps to drain the muscle of any fuel it has available and build up a fuck ton of waste products that might signal some adaptive response, you basically teleport to the front of the line. So by cutting off blood flow, wrapping a tourniquet around your arm, the 5th rep feels like the 500th rep. Now, if you believe that metabolic fatigue has some importance to growth, which I do, it's certainly important for conditioning, then this can be a useful tool. And considering that I really couldn't load my elbows at all, this was worth trying. So I would throw in occlusion training at the end of my pressing workouts. And again, I felt my triceps swell. It's hard to downplay the growth potential of something that makes your arm look like you got a bad Mexican butt implant within like 30 seconds of doing this thing. I mean, it just took a single set and my arms were engorged. It was grotesque. So at this point, having woken my triceps up, feeling that second gear on the press, and having my elbows feel like they were finally starting to heal, I was ecstatic for this prep. I had my eyes set on that log. I was going to get me some. Until I made the mistake of getting on social media and seeing the numbers that these monsters were putting up and how far away I was from catching any of them. The day was getting closer. The monsters were putting up huge numbers and all I could do was sit there with my banded press downs and catch a pump. I knew that unless I stepped it up a notch, this wasn't going to cut it. You ever find yourself confused by the complexity of programming? I know I struggled like crazy in my early strongman career. There was just too much advice and every decision I made felt like a guess. As soon as I hit a snag in any program, I would have no idea what to do, so I would inevitably bail. It took me years of training and coaching to figure out how to predictably increase muscle and strength, both in myself and others. And those lessons took me to my own showings in World's Strongest Man, America's Strongest Man, and the Arnold in the 231-pound weight class. This is why we made Base Strength AI, to give clear, direct, and personalized instruction right in the middle of your workout in real time. Base Strength AI features 3 programs: Block, 70s Powerlifter, and Bull Mastiff, each one inspired by the work ethic and programming of the biggest and strongest bodybuilders, powerlifters, and strongmen throughout history. These templates originated in my book Base Strength, and they can be ran as is, but with Base Strength AI, weight and volume are prescribed to you on your specific feedback, and that's personalization that even an online coach can't replicate. This gives you the absolute certainty that every rep is meaningful, that every block of training is getting you closer to your goals. It's my programming, but it's your program. Get the heart of old school training with the intelligence of a coach right in your back pocket. Head now to basestrength.com. So fast forward a few weeks, I'm running my overhead press program, everything's progressing as normal, and my triceps, well, they exist now. They don't look like much, but they're starting to pull their own weight on my overhead pressing, and I can open a jar of peanut butter without quiet crying, so that's progress. So we're about 2 months out, and I think, okay, I gotta get under some weight, so let's try some of these JM presses. That's a pretty good exercise. I take the bar out, I start to bend my elbows, lower the bar back towards my face. Ouch, holy shit, nope, that fucking hurt. That's what I get for being greedy. So I threw the bar back, stood up, and started mumbling obscenities while grabbing my pain-riddled elbows as I thought of ways to build up the willpower to not feel sorry for myself and call the whole fucking contest off. Now, eventually logic prevailed over my hurt feelings and petty pride, and I decided I had to find an intermediate approach that would allow me to experience some strain without absolutely killing my elbows. That meant I had to find a way to make lightweight work for me. So the big turning point of this whole thing is when I finally decided to take the same advice that I had been shoving down the throats of my clients and plastering all over social media and take bodybuilding work seriously. I know it's not as fun as loading up 200% of your max and combined free weight and band tension and having several pairs of hands spotting you to give the illusion that you actually moved it over a few inches, but this basic bodybuilding work is necessary, it's productive, and if you've been neglecting it for a long time like I was at this point, it will do immensely more for your gains than any obscure, convoluted accessory monstrosity. So in the vein of doing some basic bodybuilding work, finding exercises that were manageable for my fragile elbows, I decided to focus on 2 things: the strength curve of the exercises and finding good supersets. Supersetting was my first entry point in because I could use a lot less weight and get a really good stimulus. If occlusion training is Viagra, then a carefully selected tricep superset is Cialis. Call your fucking doctor if the pump lasts more than 4 hours. And that's not a joke. I think compartment syndrome is an actual concern of these protocols. Now, because I needed to keep the weight lighter so my fragile elbows didn't explode like Kyle Broflovski's new knees, I opted to do lighter movements first so that the weight would be reduced for the heavier compound movements, though you can absolutely switch that. Now, I found the easy rule for tricep supersets is to pair movements that have an opposite quality. So an easy one is doing compound movements with isolation movements. I think just about everybody has done a skull crusher into a close grip bench press for a burnout. Any light single joint fine movement like a rope press down or a single arm dumbbell extension can be followed up with something heavier like dips or close grip presses or skull crushers, and the burn that you get is absolutely immense, and the beauty is that you don't have to load yourself up with a crazy amount of weight. Another option is to pair things that emphasize a stretch with things that emphasize a contraction. Starting with something that focuses on the contraction like seated dips, long rope tricep press downs, getting the handles way behind you, or a dumbbell kickback is going to fatigue the triceps, drive a lot of blood in, and then when you move into something that is stretch focused, basically any overhead tricep extension, you are going to find just a nasty pump and a burn that feels like somebody is holding a blowtorch to the back of your arm. You're gonna feel like a piece of meat at a Brazilian steakhouse. Now, another one I used a lot is to pair something unstable with something stable. So if you start out with something like a rope press down, you get to the point of failure, swap the handle out for a straight bar, all of a sudden you can keep going with the exact same weight and you can get a much harder, much stronger contraction in that fatigue state, and it is absolutely brutal. Now, if it wasn't obvious to you, a same muscle superset is something you have to do at the end of your workout, because after you do it, you are absolutely useless. As I shuffle into the parking lot after an arm workout, I can't work my keys. I'm like a sitting duck. Anybody that wants to mug me, steal my ride, have their way with me behind the dumpsters, the only thing I would be able to do is sit there and say a prayer to God that my arms stop hurting so much.
What the hell? Am I in prison?
But I still needed more work. If I wanted to press my way out of a paper bag, I needed more strain. And that meant focusing on standalone exercises before I actually got to the supersets. And that is where focusing on the strength curve came in. Now, the strength curve is just a way of conceptualizing how difficult each part of a particular exercise is. Many free weight movements have a curve where the bottom of the movement, where the muscle is stretched, is really difficult. But then the closer you get to lockout, the easier it gets. Squats, deadlifts, presses, and yes, a lot of tricep extension movements fall into this category. But if you do have dodgy joints, having the most vulnerable part of the movement be the part where you are dealing with the most force, that can make your joints feel like microwave dog shit. So my rationale was that if I found a way to flatten out the strength curve, find movements where it was more uniformly difficult from start to finish, that I might be using less weight overall and saving my elbows while still getting more work at the mid-range and closer to lockout, which would be absolutely great for building my lockout power. Now, if you want to really overcomplicate the fuck out of things, you can do this with free weights by playing with the movement, the angle, by adding accommodating resistance. But my recommendation, and what was a game changer for me, was to just use a goddamn cam machine, because that's exactly what they were made for. I hate to give Arthur Jones credit for anything, but this is why Nautilus machines were invented. Cam machines were made to give a flatter strength curve, because it was hypothesized that doing so would make each repetition more hypertrophic and more efficient in stimulating growth. And it absolutely does that. I'm not saying it's a fucking end all be all, but it's a very noticeable and real difference, especially if you're not used to it, which at the time I was not. Now, my favorite is this neutral grip daddy that looks like an inverted preacher curl. You grab the handles while trying not to make any sexual innuendo, you plant your elbows on the pads, and you extend. And what you notice is that it's hard to start, it's hard in the middle, and it's hard at lockout. And after a couple of reps, your triceps are so fatigued and filled with blood that you feel like they're just gonna fall off. And the best part was the resistance in the stretch position, where my elbows were really shitty, was lowered, because now I had to adjust the weight to accommodate what I could do in the mid-range and at lockout, and each rep was more fatiguing anyways. So now I'm balls deep in my prep, and I'm starting to realize that I'm within shooting distance of some of the other hosses that are signed up for this thing. But I knew that if I wanted to win, the rest of my peak was gonna have to be picture perfect. I couldn't take a misstep. I had to come in guns blazing, and I couldn't miss a shot. I knew that maximum strength for bone crushing presses requires exposure to extreme overload, and that's what was missing. It was time to take my shitty elbows and my weak triceps and put them to the test. Did the gains that I had gotten from everything so far set me up to be able to handle a true strength peak? We were about to find out. Now, true sport-specific overload for your triceps to get better at pressing movements is going to be extreme overload in pressing movements. You're talking about very short range of motion, board presses and pin presses, especially with bands that make lockout absurdly heavy because you have a huge potential to handle weight there. That means handling just hundreds of pounds more than you're used to. Now the thing is, it's a pain in the ass to set up, hard to get the band tension just right, it takes forever, you probably need a bunch of people helping you, and it's absolutely exhausting. It doesn't mean it doesn't work, works fucking great, there's just a lot of moving pieces. So I opted for the approach that I think is at least as good, and it's obviously more accessible. I took staple tricep movements and aimed to overload them. So the big ones, you're looking at things like pin presses, skull crushers, JM presses, basically any heavy barbell tricep extension. I was focused on getting as much load out of those as I could. Now, like we said, barbell movements still tend to feature the length in position as the limiting factor. So I decided to come up with some ways to get around that. How could I shift the stress to make the lockout the harder part without having to rig up a bunch of bands or make my training unnecessarily complicated? There's two things that I focused on. Thing number one, using supportive equipment. Thing number two, using momentum. Remember, I'm not trying to focus on hypertrophy at this point. I'm trying to take the hypertrophy I've already gotten and use it to generate more fucking force than God ever intended man to produce at the last few inches of lockout on my overhead press, so I could go up to Redding, California and take a first place in a single event in a 10 event contest and do my victory lap like the meme of the guy in last place, biting the metal, shooting champagne over everybody. Because understand, at this moment in time, this is exactly what my self-worth was wrapped up in. I knew that as I went into my biggest attempt, as I cleaned the weight, took that desperate breath and jumped into it, that the difference between a champagne-fueled celebration and a trip to the orthodontist to replace the teeth that I left embedded into the wooden log was going to be the neurological conditioning I had drilled into my triceps for those last few inches of pressing. That is all I cared about. So I started implementing the heaviest tricep variations I knew of, namely skull crushers and JM presses, and I cut the range of motion down. Doing them to pins, just working on the top half, allowed me to work up to poundages in those lifts that I really didn't think was possible for me. And even though many people thought it looked stupid, it kind of felt stupid. Every single time I went to the gym, I was horsing more and more weight. I was stacking pancakes on the bar like I was a short order cook at IHOP. And the overhead pin presses that I was doing as an accessory to my overhead press jumped like 10% over the course of a few weeks because of the boost my tricep power got simply from these movements. At this point, my prep was looking pretty fucking good. Now, in addition to shortening the range of motion to focus on the top end, cheating was another invaluable tool. And you all know what I mean when I say cheating. We're doing a deliberate move to arbitrarily move more weight for the sake of moving more weight, in violation of some standard of a strict form that everybody just accepts is what is good or preferable form, usually some obnoxious, exaggerated full range of motion tempo movement that makes up the training of like no IFBB pros or elite strongmen. Now, I fully believe that strict movement should be the backbone of every young lifter's training journey, and you should always retain some of it throughout your development over time. However, you gotta pick movements in service of your main goal, and right now, as I already explained, that's horsing massive fucking weights. Now, supportive gear is one of the best ways to do this. If you wear sleeves or wraps, that's going to create a ton of compression at the bottom that helps you in the most exposed, most vulnerable position of the lift so that you can utilize more weight and do more reps and work harder at the top part of the movement, which is exactly what we care about. If you're the type of person that's done all of your tricep work bare elbowed up to this point, I guarantee implementing wraps or tight sleeves on some of your work is gonna boost your numbers like 5 to 10% in the next couple of months. That's like a guarantee. So the result of this was me using 225 for skull crushers, doing 300-pound plus strict press for reps, and given my skill and proficiency as a push presser, I knew that I was going to get closer to that 400-pound mark, which was just a surreal number at the time. Another valuable cheat is to use momentum. Yes, momentum, the thing everybody talks about, like it's gonna give you cancer, it's gonna steal your mom's pain pills, and it's gonna kill your gains in the process. I don't know how momentum became such a dirty word because things like croc rows and push presses have become synonymous with people walking around looking like somebody tried to make a person at a picnic roast. It's like it causes too much growth, is what I'm trying to say. Now, the tricep version of this is to doing a pullover skull crusher hybrid. This is a throwback to the original Westside Barbell barbell from Culver City. You know the one I'm talking about, the one that inspired Louis Simmons to borrow their name and methodologies. See, Pat Casey, the first man to bench press 600 pounds back before bench shirts were even a thing, had a very specific style of doing skull crushers where he would hang his head off the end of a bench, let the bar come way back behind his head in a deep pullover stretch position, and then violently pull the bar forward up into a lockout position. And doing this for reps created an immense stress. This was just a diabolical developmental movement. And it's something that you can't do slowly. Even with maximal poundages, you have to hit that momentum from the bottom position or you're just not getting the rep. So you have the potential to use more weight, but you also have to do so explosively. And the result was just a nasty tricep builder. Well, Bill Peanuts West, head of the original West Side Crew, said, "That's pretty good, son, but hold my beer." And he used his own methodology, which involves scooting further down the bench so that the bar could trampoline off the pad right behind your head. Now, the result of this is still getting a pretty good stretch, but being able to exploit the bounce, much like touch and go deadlifters exploit the bounce at the bottom in order to violently hoist way more weight up over your head and into a lockout position. So once again, the forces are higher, the weight is higher, and it's done over a pretty substantial range of motion. The end result is overloading the fuck out of your skull crushers and acclimating to weights that you otherwise just wouldn't be able to touch for this amount of work. It is a sick developmental exercise. This movement is legitimately to your triceps what push presses are to your deltoids. It is a great movement. For those of you that are nervously rubbing your sweating palms together saying, but does it count? Or is this in line with the current peer-reviewed literature? Do this movement until you can do 50 pounds more than when you started and get back to me with updated tricep measurements and bench press numbers and tell me if you feel the same. Now at this point, I had set my base by getting my shit straightened out. I did the blood flow work to help heal my elbows. I woke up my mummified dormant triceps, and then I transitioned to do hypertrophy work that allowed me to benefit from lighter loads using supersets, worrying about the strength curve. And I used this to set me up for the bastardized tricep movements that only an amoral deviant would use, let alone post on social media as a recommendation for other lifters. And the result was that my arms were bigger and stronger than they had ever been up to that point, and I was moving weight that put me in contention for the top spot in a max log press at a pro level show. You couldn't plan for phase potentiation this pretty in a blocked out pre-planned macro cycle. Now I'll save you the dramatic retelling of the event. We showed up, this was event number 3 or 4. It was rising bar, they were doing 20-pound jumps. Guys dropped out at 340, a few at 360. And then there was me and 2 other heavyweight pros at 380, which one of them missed. And the bar jumped once again, this time to 410. That might as well have been 900 pounds to me because the idea of hitting 400 seemed astronomical, and I wasn't sure I'd be able to clean it, let alone press it. All the pressure was on me. I didn't come here to tie. I came here to win this goddamn event because I was sure to get my shit pushed in on all the others. And I needed my wife for like 5 minutes to think that I was a winner. So I went up, cleaned the log, positioned my elbows, squeezed the handles, and gave that desperate push, jumping it to that same dead spot that had plagued me for as long as I had been lifting. Right over my head, the log started to slow down, except where before there had been nothing backing my press. This time I had some meat. I had an extra gear, and as the log slowed down, it continued to move as my newly developed triceps grinded the weight to lockout, and I stuck a 410 log press to take the win in that event. So I had pulled out an IHGF record. I'd done it in front of 2 legends of strength sports in front of a crowd and to beat some of the best strongmen in California. At that point, that was one of the highlights of my career, and it came on the back of a very deliberate training approach that I am very proud of. I did the prep, I beat who I beat, and I'm very proud of how everything went down, and I'm hoping that my journey gave some specific insight into how you should be piecing your programming together, how to solve some problems, and maybe some cool ideas to try in the future that might get you to realize your fullest potential. So let me know what you think, guys. Leave your questions and comments in the comment section below. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.